Good morning. I am coming live to you from my library, and it's story time. I'm making this video because I posted what I thought was a funny post on my personal page last night, and I thought people would think it was hilarious and like dive in there and start sharing. And so what I had said in the post was that the word in the Pentagon secrets of secrets is that the Anunnaki are coming back, and that that yeah, the Anunnaki are coming back, and like, what are they going to be like? What the actual fuck humans when they come back to this planet? Now, I thought the Anunnaki was like common knowledge, and that's because I live on planet Joanna. And there's a lot of things in my head that I think is common knowledge, but I realize the Anunnaki are not common knowledge. So what I thought I'd do is make a little video, educational / interesting shit. So, who are the Anunnaki? What are the Anunnaki? So, according to Sumerian texts, they're some of the oldest clay tablets with written language ever found in the world. Now, they were found in a place called Sumeria, which no longer exists, and it's ancient Babylon is where they were found. And there were little clay tablets. They measured no more than this. They were about this size, each of them, and there was thousands of them, and they had a story written upon them. And these stories basically told of this race of bigger people. So they were between about 8 feet to 10 feet, some as tall as 12 feet high, that came from the stars. And they came from the stars, and they needed, their own planet was in deep shit. And their planet is called Nibiru. And their planet was in deep shit. And then what they had done is they had constructed a kind of like a kind of geodesic dome around their planet, but the lining of that dome required gold, and their planet wasn't very rich in gold deposits. So they had scoured the universe to find a planet that would have gold on it, and they came to Earth, and they discovered that we had plenty of gold. So they basically started mining operations here on Earth. But Earthlings weren't very advanced. We were in one of the Homo sapiens. The Homo sapiens were on Earth at the time. They were our ancient ancestors, basically, but they weren't very advanced. And so what the Anunnaki did was they created a race of people. And the first race of people that they created was a terrible disaster, because they mixed a lot of their own DNA and they created this race of people. And eventually what happened was that these people went, hang on, wait a minute, this is bullshit. Why are we working for you? And they revolted and they overthrew the Anunnaki. But the Anunnaki were not done. So they decided, they actually annihilated the first lot of people. They removed them from Earth. And then the Anunnaki decided that they would actually take the existing kind of semi-sentient, we were more animal at that point, take that existing being, and they would mix their DNA with our earliest ancestors' DNA. And so you might have heard people talking about a missing link. Now you've got to remember, these clay tablets are being translated. They're thousands of years old, right? And this whole story is coming out in these clay tablets. It's like, right? So basically they mix their DNA with the original kind of like, we were very ape-like at that point, right? And they create the first man, which they named the first man Adamu. Where we heard that before? Very similar to Adam. So they name Adamu, and then they create they create a wife for Adam. They create a female version for Adam, and the version that they create is not Eve. Nay, nay. They create a being that they call Lilith. They also create another woman called Nama. So we're like, okay, where is this going? So what happened was that there was two brothers, one called Enki and one called Enkel. And these two brothers of the Anunnaki didn't agree on things. One of the brothers thought that we should just frickin' work, and that we shouldn't get anything good. We should just work. We should just harvest this gold from the planet. These creatures are below us. But what happened with the other brother is that he started to fall in love with humanity. He started to think, these are quite cool people. Like, this creation of ours is pretty cool. And what happened was it created a big war, a war in heaven, literally. And so if we talk about the heavens, we always think about looking upwards. Well, there is well documented throughout many, many, many different cultures, in very old paintings from like the 13th, 14th, 15th century, that there was a war in heaven. And there's lots of documentation that there was this war in heaven. Well, according to these clay tablets, a war in heaven did indeed happen. And it was a fight over whether humans should have more rights or not. That's what it was. So apparently, according to these clay tablets, now don't come for me if you are super religious and you're like, no, God created everything. You know what? I'm just telling you what was on these clay tablets, right? They were thousands of years old. Now you got to remember, back in thousands and thousands of years old, not everybody could read or write. So the people who did read or write, it was seen as a precious thing. So they didn't really waste it on fiction, right? So there was a really cool man called Sakurai Sitchin. This is a couple of his books. Now, these books may not look like this anymore because these are literally ancient. You can see how yellow they are. They are quite old, these books. Now, this one is called Stairway to Heaven, and this one is called Divine Encounters, a guide to visions, angels, and other emissaries. Now, this is one of the Sumerian gods. And this is actually, this piece of photograph is actually from one of the reliefs found in ancient Babylon, which was ancient Sumeria. So they had this war, and basically one of the brothers thought that humans should be able to govern themselves, that they shouldn't take advantage of humans in the way that they were taking advantage of humans. Now, the interesting thing is that these clay tablets talked about our solar system. And it talks about our solar system actually having a binary star. So what is a binary star? So a binary star is where our solar system has a star that's quite close to it, and that it affects sometimes the gravitational pull of our solar system. And it also described how many planets were in the solar system. Now, you've got to remember, in modern times, how many planets our solar system have was not actually accurately discovered until the early 19th century. So these clay tablets are sitting here, they're thousands and thousands of years old, and they're accurately describing our solar system, saying all the planets are in our solar system. They're even talking about their distances, things like that, right? So it's mind-blowing to think that this really, really primitive people who have just learned to write are writing these clay tablets, telling the story of these people that came from the heavens, and that they are unfolding this, right? So it's like quite a crazy story. So what happened then? So then what happened is that the Anunnaki began to, they had this war, and then they needed to leave, because here's the thing. Their planet orbits our star, which is our sun, but it also orbits our sun's binary, meaning twin star. And it orbits the twin stars. So it has an elliptical orbit, not a circular orbit. Now, Earth has a circular orbit that goes round the sun. Now, this planet Nibiru has an elliptical orbit, and it takes 3,600 years. And according to these clay tablets, it took 3,600 years to orbit round our sun, go round the binary sun, and then come back. Okay, now when their planet was making this, so every 3,600 years, apparently the Anunnaki return to Earth. Now, having another celestial body like Nibiru in our solar system creates cataclysms for Earth, destabilizes our poles, it destabilizes our electromagnetic field, all of these things. Now, all of this was documented in these little clay tablets. But apparently, according to some scholars, those clay tablets are pure fiction, which is kind of weird, right? So anyway, I was watching Twitter and I thought everybody knew about the Anunnaki. I thought everybody was like, had some idea who the fuck they were, what they were all about. The Anunnaki, a lot of the names. So let me just go back. So when the Anunnaki made human beings, where did they keep them? Well, they kept them in a paradise called Eden. What? A paradise called Eden? Right, but let's dissect those words, right? Paradise, actually, the etymology of the word, the origin of the word, actually comes from ancient Sumerian, and it actually means enclosure, or like enclosed is what it means, right? So paradise means enclosure, okay? And they made the Adamu, the Adams, right? The men, the Adamus, to work for them, to worship them. And the word, an etymology of the word worship means to work for. Okay. And the word Eden means animal pen. So a paradise, an enclosure, an animal pen called Eden, with people that were meant to work for, right? So it totally rewrites the kind of story of Genesis. And we can see where all of these words have come from. And then later in the Hebrew, these words were co-opted and used and changed. The meaning of them changed. So paradise means what we think now, today, paradise. Paradise simply means, in ancient Sumerian, an enclosure. So here's the thing, right? So it's quite, and it's like, I thought everybody kind of knew about the Anunnaki. But anyway, the thing over on TikTok, and you know how reliable TikTok is. I mean, like, oh my God, you could like literally set your watch by how reliable it is over there. And that is sarcasm. Is that according to Pentagon sources, the Anunnaki and the planet of Nibiru is returning to Earth. Dun, dun, dun. So anyway, I put that post on yesterday as a thing just to be funny and just be like, can you imagine like if you had made human beings and then you left and then you came back like 3,600 years later? Like what would you think of modern day Earth? You know, what would you think of like modern day Earth? What would you think? Like, would you be like, what the actual fuck? Right? Would you be like, oh my God, humans, what are you doing? So I thought it was funny, and I wrote, I basically wrote, like, you know, what are things that like the Anunnaki would be like, what the hell? Anyway, so when I wrote that post, you know, I wrote like the fact that they take fat from their asses and stick it in their lips, right? Like, if an alien race had actually made us and that's how we came to be on this planet, like, if they were returning, what the fuck? Like, isn't it funny? Like, please, I'm not alone here. Let me know if I'm alone here or not, because I thought it was hilarious. Could you just imagine? Like, they come back in their like little spaceships and they're like, Yeah, like, and you think how technologically advanced we have become in the last, even the last 200, 300 years, how much we have evolved. And of course, these guys have been out of the loop for 3,600 years, according to how the planet moves. So it just made me giggle because I just thought, I just thought like, this was not the Earth we left. And I just thought like, they would be like, what the actual fuck are humans doing? And I thought it would be funny, and I thought it would get a lot of funny answers, but instead it got a lot of confusion because I didn't realize that everybody does not live on planet Joanna, and not everybody knew about the Anunnaki, which I thought was common knowledge. Apparently it's not common knowledge. So I just wanted to clear that up of what they are and who they are. So anyway, they were these overlords. Have you ever seen a film called Battlefield Earth with John Travolta? So if you've ever seen a film called Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, let me know if you've ever seen that. In that film is apparently supposed to depict the Anunnaki. And the slaves in that film are the humans, the human race. And then this race of aliens, the Anunnaki, who had enslaved the human race. But it was supposed to have been taken from these, like the plot line from that film, Battlefield Earth, was supposed to have been taken from this ancient Sumerian stories and the ancient Sumerian texts. Now, there's also texts known, the epics of Gilgamesh, which are these amazing texts on basically a man called Gilgamesh. And they're called the epics, and he went on lots of different journeys and things like that. So these are all really interesting. But what's really interesting in these is that so here's the lands where they occupied. If you can see in this book, this is the lands that they occupied. Now, there is several things in these clay tablets, which I don't want to freak anyone out here, because that's not my intention with this live, is to freak anyone out. But there are several things. Yes, the Epics of Gilgamesh depicts the journey. That's correct. So in the Epics of Gilgamesh, in the little cuneiform clay tablets, I'm going to see if I can find a picture of the clay tablets so you can see them. But in the little clay tablets, one of the things of the clay tablets was that the little clay tablets that they had, one of the things that there was really kind of significant in them was that there were so many, and this man Zachariah Sitchin, he was actually a translator, and he went on to write these books. Now Zachariah Sitchin was eventually sort of ended up as a fringe scientist. Now he was very, very much well respected academic scientist, otherwise he would never have gotten the gig to look at these clay tablets that were some of the oldest and possibly the oldest texts on planet Earth. You would never have gotten that gig, so he must have been well respected. And what happened was he translated those tablets directly, and as he translated those clay tablets directly, he lost his sort of standing in the community, in the scientific community, because obviously what these clay tablets were proposing was that an alien race had come to Earth and seeded our planet by mixing their DNA with what was already on the planet, which was an ape-like creature, which probably would have maybe ended up becoming modern day man. But this is also, but in a way, his translation of these clay tablets also like kind of says why there's a missing link. The reason there's a missing link is we didn't evolve. There was something that we evolved so far, and then something came along to evolve us further. Now, I'm not saying any of this is true. What I wanted to explain was I mean, I thought my post yesterday was hilarious of like, can you imagine that an alien race leaves this planet 3,600 years ago, thinking, you know, we're not that technologically advanced 3,600 years ago. So, you know, we're not that advanced, and they leave this planet thinking, great, see you in another 3,600 years, and then they come back to find modern day 2023 life. There was just part of me that was like absolutely giggling at that and thinking like all of the shit that we do in modern life, like what would this ancient race think as they return to the planet? That was my whole thing. Like, what would they think as they return to the planet? Would they be like, what the actual fuck? And would they, you know, would they be like, what on earth is going on, literally? You know, because we do a lot of really funny stuff, like take fat from our asses and stick it in our lips, and we destroy the very thing that's sustaining life, and like a lot of gnarly things that we do as human beings. Anyway, my post obviously missed the mark yesterday, so I do apologize for that if it left anybody totally confused. Go check out the Anunnaki. Go educate yourself. Go down that rabbit hole. It is a very, 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 very very, very interesting rabbit hole to explore. For instance, the goddess Isis, the Egyptian goddess Isis, is actually a Nama, is the Sumerian goddess, who is also known as the Egyptian goddess Isis. She is then known in more modern times as the Black Madonna. She is known as many other goddesses. She has the Hera from the Greeks. This is like the mother goddess, but this was actually, according to these Sumerian tablets, it was actually a woman. And she also, I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background there. She's, hey, shh, Daisy, come on, come and sit. So she's just whingy today, aren't you, Daisy? What's happening? So yeah, if you have any questions, I don't know if I'll have the answers, but do ask me. The person that I would definitely check out is this guy, Sakurai Sitchin. He was, I think he's an incredibly brave scientist and an incredibly brave archaeologist, in the fact that, you know, he was willing to basically put his career on the line by you know, literally, you know, releasing what was on these clay tablets. And obviously that did not go with the normal doctrine, and that did not go with the normal way of doing things and stuff like that. So, but it is interesting nonetheless. Another person that I think is very interesting that doesn't really, well, he does talk about the Anunnaki, but it's a man called Graham Hancock. So don't know if any of you have read any of his books. Let me know in the comments if you've ever read Graham Hancock. So Graham Hancock believes that, so we had, at the end of the last ice age, we emerged from the earth, and a lot of things happened at the end of the last ice age, which was only about 11,000 years ago. So it wasn't like a huge amount of time ago, like 12,000 years ago was the last ice age. And when the last ice age happened, human beings suddenly took like a giant leap forward. And I don't know if the photos, to be honest, Mac, will do you any good, to be honest, because these books are, I've had these in my library since 2004. And this one I've had in my library, when was it printed? This one's possibly even older. Yeah, this has been since 1996. So this one has been here since 1996. So yes. So I don't know if the covers will actually look like this anymore, but this one is called Divine Encounters, and this one is called The Stairway to Heaven. So they're quite interesting. But the Graham Hancock has this theory that humans on Earth have had a high level of sophistication and a high level of advancement before. And one of the things that's very interesting in our current level of advancement is our energy that we use. So the energy that we use at the moment on Earth is known as explosion energy. We do have the other form of energy, which is implosion energy. So what's the difference between explosion energy and implosion energy? Well, explosion energy is like coal, nuclear power, I'm trying to think, wood, like when you burn wood. So explosion energy is where you actually destroy the thing that releases the energy, right? So a steam engine, for instance, could either be powered with coal or wood or peat. So, but the problem is that with coal, wood or peat, the coal, wood or peat is not left intact. It is destroyed. At the end of it, the explosion happens. The energy of those items, as they're burnt, is released, creating momentum in the steam train, for instance. So that is explosion energy. Implosion energy is when we use a cleaner form of energy where the thing that's producing the energy stays intact. So good examples of implosion energy are wave power or hydropower, wind power, wind turbines. The wind is not destroyed by it powering the wind turbine. So nothing is destroyed, only energy is released. So that is an example of implosion energy. Now, I really, really believe that if Graham Hancock's theory of human beings having a greater kind of thing of advancement is that they must have used implosion energy. Now, one of the things that's really, really interesting about this is that the Great Pyramid at Giza at the very, very top in 1922, now I'm going to have to look up who the guy was, but it was an archaeologist. But in 1922, he had this theory that the top of the pyramid at Giza was still a self-perpetuating energy machine. That was his theory. And at that point in 1922, you could clamber all over the pyramids. You could climb to the freaking top if you wanted, which obviously you cannot do now. It's a huge no-no now. So what he did was he had these Sherpas, so these Egyptian Sherpas with him. He was a British man, and he took a wine bottle and he put a copper rod in the wine bottle, and then he put stuffed newspaper in the lid of the wine bottle, and he put, I think it was water or lemon juice or something in the bottom of it, okay? And he climbed up to the very, very, very top of the Great Pyramid at Giza, the biggest pyramid at Giza, climbed to the very, very top. Now, that pyramid is missing its capstone. The capstone is not on that pyramid anymore, so it's kind of flat at the top. So he got to the top, and he gets to the top and he stands on that flat surface and he holds the wine bottle aloft, which creates a surge of energy which sets, like, it goes through the copper, which is a superconductor, the water in the bottle, superconductor, glass, not so much. And then the newspaper is obviously highly flammable, but what happens is that the newspaper catches fire, which proves this archaeologist's theory right, that the Great Pyramid at Giza is still producing energy. It's still producing an energy frequency. Now, that is subtle energy. Now, what's really interesting is when electricity was becoming a common thing in the world, we were using, obviously to start with, we were using gas, which is an explosion energy because the gas is used up, and we were using things like wood and coal and peat to have fires and things like that, heat our homes, stuff like that, right? Even street lights, early street lights were gasoline, and somebody had to go along and like literally light them. So as Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison were neck and neck trying to fight it out of who was going to win this electricity race, Nikola Tesla took his ideas and his designs apparently from places like the Great Pyramids of Giza. And one of the things that he did was he created a thing called a Tesla Tower. Now, the Tesla Tower is really interesting because basically what it was is it had waterways underneath, which the Great Pyramids at Giza do. A lot of people don't know this. Now, these waterways are not straight canals. Now, if you were creating waterways under something, and these are built, these are man-made, they have bricks around them. So we know that these waterways are man-made. So if you were creating man-made, and at the time, you've got to remember that the Great Pyramids of Giza sit in a big desert now, but at the time when they were younger, they sat on the banks of the Nile. So they would have been really impressive. There were these big white structures covered in lime, and lime is a super insulator for electricity, right? And they have these granite blocks that don't come from quarries near the pyramids. They come from over 100 miles away, and these giant granite blocks have a high quartz matrix. Now, quartz is a super amplifier of energy, not just for New Agers to have a bit of quartz down their brow or whatever. Quartz has been used and well documented for many years. Your quartz movement on your watch means that your watch is powered by a quartz crystal under pressure. So the pyramids have this very electrical construction. Anyway, the story is that Nikola Tesla observed this and thought, I wonder if I could create something similar. So he created these waterways. Now, the waterways, the water don't flow straight. The water flows at odd angles, which creates an ionization of the water. The shape of the pyramid, or in Nikola Tesla's Tesla Tower, the shape funnels that ionized kind of energy up the way. And then what happens is that we have our atmosphere. It's around our planet, but there is a layer in our atmosphere known as the ionosphere. And the ionosphere, funnily enough, contains lots and lots of ions. And what that does is, with the Tesla Tower and the way that it's built, in the same way that the pyramids are built, that they actually download the energy, which creates Wi-Fi energy. So Wi-Fi means wireless, right? Wireless energy. So this is what Nikola Tesla was actually attempting to create, was this wireless energy. And Nikola Tesla was backed by a man called J.P. Morgan of the bank, J.P. Morgan, right? The banker. And so he was backed by J.P. Morgan, and other banks were backing Thomas Edison as being the person that was going to like electrify the world, right? But when J.P. Morgan discovered that Nikola Tesla proposed to create Wi-Fi energy, which could not be metered, aka could not make money from it, and he realized that money couldn't be made from that energy, he was like, no, dude, no, I'm not backing you anymore. I'm not giving you any more money. And he literally overnight shut down Nikola Tesla's accounts, withdrew all of his backing, all of his funding, withdrew any promissory notes of funding that he had given to Nikola Tesla, and literally bankrupted Nikola Tesla. And then, to add insult to injury, JP Morgan took his money and backed Thomas Edison instead. And now Thomas Edison's idea of electricity was to use cables, which could be metered, which meant the bankers could make money. So this is how Nikola Tesla ended up penniless, and how Thomas Edison ended up being the person that we credit to bringing electricity. But actually there was two kinds. But it's that form of electricity that we have tends to be a very destructive form of electricity. Whereas I believe that if Graham Hancock, who has this theory that we have had a great stage of advancement before, and that perhaps other races from other planets had a hand in giving us that advancement, that we were using things like we were using implosion energy back in the past, which was a much cleaner energy, which would have left the fact that we wouldn't have been, because one of the theories is, well, if we were using, if we had sort of power and things like that, wouldn't there be more evidence of things like burn marks and stuff like that? And then, when we go into like the ancient Egyptian structures, for instance, there's a lot of structures where there should be, if they were using like torches, for instance, to light their way to building these structures, one of the things is, if there was torches, like if they were using torches, there should be like soot and burn marks on the ceilings. And if you burn candles in your home, you can see often you get that dark ceiling. And yet in these structures, there's no evidence, which beggars the question of, what did they do? Like, could they see in the dark? And we know humans cannot see in the dark. So what did they do to light? And this is this theory of ancient electricity. And then we've got things like really interesting stuff like the Baghdad batteries, for instance, which are some of the oldest batteries ever found, and they're over 2,000 years old. They're canopic jars with a copper cylinder inside, and the inside of the jars have been scraped, and they know that they were filled with lemon juice. Now, lemon juice and copper like this together in a sealed jar produces an electrical current. So they know that they would have had some type of, that these batteries, would have been functioning and working. So it's all very, very interesting. I thought a lot of this stuff was like really common knowledge, but I live on planet Joanna, and it's often a planet for one, and I forget that not everyone is a total fucking bookworm like me and spends hours and hours down rabbit holes researching weird and wonderful things on this planet that we live on. I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive when it comes to stuff like that. I freaking love it. When I was younger, I really, really wanted to be an archaeologist, and especially an Egyptologist. So I was absolutely obsessed with ancient Egypt as a child. And so I spent many years of my childhood nose in a book, reading about these ancient cultures and things like that. And it's really fascinating when you start delving down there. There's a lot of mysteries, and unfortunately mainstream science doesn't really do very much to dispel these mysteries. So for instance, carbon dating, when it was first introduced, carbon dating was not very accurate, but it's quite an accurate thing now. And they're able to get accuracies. But when there's anomalies in carbon dating, instead of looking and thinking, okay, well, we have carbon dating, it tends to be extremely accurate for many things, but then you'll get an anomalous item, an item that will say it's 1,000,000 years old, and it shows tool marks on it, and they'll be like, nah, we can't have an item that's 1,000,000 years old. Like, everyone knows that humans weren't here 1,000,000 years ago, so nah. And what happens is that then science gets disregarded. And that's one of the things that kind of annoys me a little bit, because I think if people, and what happens is, like, obviously, like the man Sakurai Sitchin, he was kind of slightly ostracized from the academic community, which is such a shame when things like that happen, because and so there is. But Graham Hancock, he's got a lot of heat for the things that he's saying and stuff like that. And Graham Hancock will say, one of the things that I really, really appreciate about Graham Hancock, if you're ever going to go down this rabbit hole and like study some people, one of the things I appreciate about Graham Hancock is he will tell you, like, upfront, I am not an archaeologist. and I am not a specialist in archaeology. He is, however, an investigative research journalist. Right? So let's go through that again. An investigative research journalist. So he has approached the whole Younger Dryas, which is the name of the end of the last ice age period in humanity, through the lens of an investigative journalist. So he is collecting as much research and evidence as possible, finding scientists. And what he's finding, you know, the evidence that he has found is really undeniable for the mainstream narrative to really, you know, the mainstream narrative needs to change, but they're refusing to change the mainstream narrative because it means that human history literally requires to be rewritten. And one of the things that is very, very prevalent in the mainstream narrative of human history is that we were dumb as fuck, and then we got smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter till 2023. And look how smart we are now. And the truth is that Graham Hancock's work is really showing that perhaps we've actually been pretty smart all along, and that we have been open and available to different things, and that we've actually had different times in our history of where we have reached levels of advancement. Then cataclysmic events have happened which has reduced the level of advancement, and every time that we go up and down in the scale of going up and down, obviously old technology is lost and new technology is birthed. And how we do that technology each time as human beings go up and down in this sort of scale is sometimes, you know, and this particular epoch that humans are in right now is we have got very destructive types of energy that we're using, which actually destroys the source that's creating the energy, aka fuel in your tank of your car. That is a good example of explosion energy. And you know, and that has created, but I think other cultures had more harmonious energy sources that that didn't damage the planet in the same way that we're damaging the planet. So anyway, that is story time with me this morning. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if any of this was really interesting to you. I will say to you guys that, you know, I am a student of metaphysics, and I'm actually taking my doctorate in metaphysical science. So what does that mean? Well, metaphysics is the only study that studies, basically is the only scientific study that studies what happens like after we die, and what happens in our, you know, where do we come from? It answers big existential questions like, who are we? What are we all about? That's what that science seeks to answer. And it's an answer that goes beyond. Now, I would say that I started my doctorate in 2000 and I want to say 2019, but I would have to check that. So I started studying my doctorate in 2019, but you know what? Before I started studying metaphysics, I was already a student of metaphysics. I have literally been a student of metaphysics since I was a child. So I have, and metaphysics for me is like, if they ever created a science for me, that was the science. Now, the reason I'm really interested in metaphysical science is that, the reason I'm so interested in metaphysical science is it explains why my brain is the way that it is. So I've always been able to see energy. I've always been able to sense energy. I've always been able to have these abilities. And because I've had these abilities all my life, there was two choices for me. I was either batshit crazy or there was a scientific explanation for that. And that's actually how I got into science when I was younger. So when I was younger, I began studying lots of things. And of course, when I was younger, I had this complete and utter obsession with ancient Egypt. You know, if they were like, hey, you need to do a school project about a country, I was like, Egypt straight away. So I was really, really fascinated about all the, you know, the ancient cultures and things like that as well. And one of the things that really fascinated me even as a child was how spiritual these cultures were, and how they had people like, you know, in ancient in Greece, they had things like the oracles of Delphi and people like that. And I was like, ooh, that's like people like me. And, you know, I was fascinated with biblical stories, for instance, of like prophets. So they, you know, one of the characters from the Bible that totally fascinates me, and now it makes perfect sense, but it was the prophet Enoch. And you know, and these, you know, and again, the books of Enoch, they were banned from the Bible. They have been carbon dated to being like, these are historical records, but they were banned from the Bible because they talk about things like giants, and they talk about things like flying saucers, and they talk about things like the land getting smaller and smaller and smaller and appearing as though it is made of patchwork. Ever been on a plane and looked down on all the fields? It looks like patchwork, right? But there was this man, Enoch, human man in a non-advanced society, describing what it's like to go up in a plane. So yeah, so the books of Enoch got banned, and they talk about things like the Watchers and stuff like that. So it's very, very fascinating. Very, very fascinating stuff. But I have literally been a lifelong student of this. So even though I'm, you know, I am a life and business coach, that's what I do for a living. But, you know, when I work in the spiritual side and teaching spiritual things, like, it is rooted in so much, like, it is rooted in so much different types of sciences, archaeology, and things. I will study something literally to death before I kind of talk about it and stuff like that. But just to, yeah, if you didn't know that about me. So yeah, I've been a student of metaphysics, and I classify a lot of these things like what's on these clay tablets, although that's archaeology. It's where metaphysics and archaeology really cross over, because metaphysics is really a study of kind of moving beyond the quantum realm. It's a mixture of many things like law of attraction, quantum science, quantum physics, particle physics is all part of metaphysical science. And then the more spiritual aspects are all part of metaphysical science as well. And it's something that I've just always found so fascinating. So yeah, I know that was a bit of a long-winded, like, little story time of my post yesterday about the Anunnaki, but now you know. So the Anunnaki are the kind of official party line of Earth at this point in time, is that the Anunnaki were seen as the Sumerian gods. They were not aliens, they were the Sumerian gods. According to the cuneiform tablets, they were gods, but we also have to look at the etymology of the word God, which means overlord. So a little bit like, and then or guardian, it can also mean guardian. And so then we have, you know, but then the clay tablets say how these people came from the stars. If we look at other ancient cultures like the Maya and the Olmec and the Toltec, they tell stories of people who came from the stars. Native American cultures, the Hopi Indians very famously have stories that have been verbally passed through generation to generation. And these stories, the Hopis talk about the star people who came from the stars and taught them things like farming and agriculture. The same with the Olmecs, the Mayans, and the Toltecs. They also talk about the star people who came, who taught them farming. In the clay tablets, they say that these Sumerian gods taught them farming, and taught them agriculture and how to grow their own food and things like that. So it's quite fascinating once you get into it all and you start to see all of the connections of things, because you've got to remember the official party line of Earth is that these cultures had no connection to each other. Now, we know that some of that is a little bit bullshit. Oh, what is happening there? It's like something floating around my head. We know that that is bullshit because there, for instance, there was a mummy found in ancient Egypt of a woman who had cacao leaves. That's where you get cocaine from, cocoa leaves. But in the Andes, they chew that to help with altitude. So they chew those leaves, but they do. It does give you a high, right? But like that was found in her coffin. Now this mummy was like over 2,000 years old. 2,000 years ago, Egypt and Central America, they had no trade routes apparently, and yet cacao only grows in Central America at that time. So when you see things like that, that is what Graham Hancock talks about as like an anomaly. That is an anomaly, right? And like modern mainstream science does not want to explain that anomaly. They do not. They tend to ignore that. They tend to say, no, 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 we don't know what that is. But like here we have a mummy that's literally in the coffin with her, has these cacao leaves that are carbon dated from the time that the mummy was wrapped. So it makes no sense, because the only way that those leaves could have appeared in that coffin in ancient Egypt is if there was a trade route between Central America and Egypt. Now, apparently those two cultures didn't know anything about each other. So it's fascinating when you start to look. And there's a lot of things that are, you know, a lot of hidden science. And it really paints a picture that older humans were just as smart as modern day humans. And that, you know, we haven't suddenly just gotten smarter and smarter and smarter, which is what mainstream science wants to portray. So Sarah's saying, I studied physics at A-level and wanted to study at uni. My grades weren't good enough, so I was encouraged to study French, which I did. I've always been fascinated by energy and quantum physics. One of my favourite books so far is Sandra Ann Taylor, Quantum Success. Oh, amazing. Yeah. Quantum physics is absolutely fascinating, and particle physics is absolutely fascinating, and it explains so much about our universe and explains so much about our lives. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this little live stream. Yeah, and according to TikTok, which is not that reliable, but according to TikTok, the word in the Pentagon that has got everybody all abuzz in the Pentagon is that the planet Nibiru, which is the home world of the Anunnaki, is coming back into the orbit of Earth, into its elliptical orbit that it's in. It travels around our star and our sun and our sun's twin. So it is on a giant elliptical orbit. It takes 3,600 years for Earth years for that planet to travel around. The people of Nibiru, the other thing as well, the people with Nibiru, they tend to live thousands of years, is another thing that they have as well, is, and that's documented. But then there's documentation in the Bible, for instance, that Methuselah is the oldest recorded human, and he lived to be over 1,000 years of age according to biblical texts. So it's very, very fascinating. In fact, because we were so fucking sinful, there is a passage in the Bible where it basically says that God reduced our lifespan from being, you know, 1,000 years to being 120 years. And if you look at what people, like the oldest humans, you know, 126, I think someone was, 130. So that's like the oldest humans. And then there's, yeah, it's fascinating, all the stuff that's in my head. I was just about to go off on a tangent there and tell you about 6 zones on the world. There's 6 places in the world where people naturally live to well over 100. How cool is that? Like, who knew that? Like, that's so cool. Sarah saying, I love the amount of wisdom you have. It's just literally the way my brain is wired. If I find something fascinating, it literally goes in there and it's just there. And then years later it comes out and I'm like, oh my God. And a lot of people say to me, Joanna, you kind of know a lot of things about a lot of things. And it's true, I do. But it's just if I find it fascinating, it's just somehow my brain just retains the information and stores it. Um, and yeah, so, but it's something I find really, really, like, I am very fascinated about the origins of human beings, and I'm very fascinated about where we're going. And what I mean by where we're going, consciously, where are we going? Like in our consciousness. I actually really believe that human minds are really changing. We are rising in consciousness. We're rising in moving into higher consciousness states, moving from the third dimensional world, moving into the fifth dimensional world. But I also think this is not the first time that we have done this. And I think this is why the ancient Egyptians were so obsessed with death, and they were so obsessed with the afterlife and what happens afterwards, of when we go from the physical form into the conscious form. We're moving forms, moving from physical to non-physical. And this was an obsession with the ancient Egyptians. All of their buildings, all of their huge monuments were really literally dedicated to this. And I find it so incredibly, incredibly fascinating, because when we see, when we start to understand things like that, we start to realize, like, holy moly, like, there is what I call, like, for instance, I teach light web, and for me, light web is spiritual technology. And to see that if you imagine, like, how much our iPhones have changed our lives in the last 20 years, and of course iPhones are not even 20 years old yet, but mobile phones in general, but in the last, in the last 20 years, how much smartphones and things like that have changed our lives. Like, it's really, really, like, that is what technology does. It can really change our lives. With something like Lightweb, for instance, it is a spiritual technology, and it is, and I really do believe that the technologies of the future will be spiritual based, which sounds, I know it sounds like a sci-fi movie, but that's what I really feel. And the more that we can open ourselves up to the realms of quantum physics, understand that, apparently a single particle in your voice box can affect something in the Amazon forest, because of the quantum entanglement of particles. So when you start to understand that, and you start to understand that your entire being, your entire body, the way that it's structured, one of the largest, most stable torus fields in nature is produced by our very own hearts. Our hearts produce one of the largest, most stable torus fields. So our torus field looks like a giant donut, and it's a field that moves in on itself. When you see a torus field sliced through the middle, it looks like an apple that's been sliced through the middle. And so it has a bit that comes in the bottom, and then it has a bit that goes in at the bottom and a bit at the top. And then it kind of bounces out like a donut. So it's like got a hole in the middle, and then that middle. But our hearts produce that. That field, by spiritual people, is called the aura. But in science, it's known as an electromagnetic field, and every human being's heart and their heart chamber produces an electromagnetic field. And how you're doing as a human being determines the size of your field. So if you're feeling really happy and you're feeling really good, the size of your field becomes very large. If you're feeling really shitty and really terrible, the size of your field collapses. And I just find things like that fascinating. A great film is The Power of the Heart. I've not seen that one actually, but yeah, so it's amazing. And like, there's so much stuff. The fact that our thoughts can be measured outside of our heads is another really cool thing. That means our thoughts exist beyond our minds. Just think about that for a moment. Just take a moment to appreciate the absolute weirdness of that, that our thoughts exist beyond our minds. So yeah, I'm just fascinated by us. I think we're some of the most absolutely fascinating things on this planet. And when we start to see, you know, and why did human beings, and if you go down the rabbit hole of why did human beings develop in the first place, you know, one of the reasons why human beings became smarter than other animals was because our pleasure centers developed and became bigger. So all of this that we have created as human beings, we created in the pursuit of pleasure. Like, but with that knowledge, you can completely and utterly leverage like how your mind works. You know, we will work for something if we perceive that the reward is worth it. So, you know, if you're ever struggling to motivate yourself and you're ever procrastinating, having that piece of knowledge is absolute gold. And that comes from just knowing how human beings developed in the first place. Our pleasure centers in our brains increased exponentially compared to that of animals. And therefore, we are reward-driven creatures, which is, like, it makes so much sense, right? And so everything that we've created is because we perceived a reward was going to be worth it. So we did it. But we can use that to leverage ourselves and growing our businesses and growing, you know, things like that, which is really, really cool. So yeah, I love to mix it up with a little bit of science, and I love to mix it up with, you know, quantum physics and a little bit of metaphysics in there as well, and all of that, and then a healthy dose of like ancient cultures. I find it all very, very fascinating. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up there before I ramble for the rest of the day, because honestly, I could talk about this stuff like forever and a day. It is so very, very fascinating. But yeah, and if you have any questions, drop me a comment. And Vandra's saying I love all of these stories. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully I've not bored you too much, because I can really harp on about this. When I get on a, you know, on a thing, I'm just like, it's just so fascinating. It's like, oh my God. And you dig a little bit deeper, and you dig a little bit deeper, and you just find like more and more and more. And it's so crazy. And it's all there. It's not like you have to look very hard for it. It's all there. And there's so many amazing, incredible authors out there who have written on these subjects and stuff like that. And I love it. Anyway, I'm going to jump off, but I'll have a lovely, lovely, lovely Sunday. No way, it's the opposite to boring. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's why you're in my world. That's why you're in my world. Anyone that finds this boring, they can basically be it. Mag, you are so welcome. You are so welcome. Have a lovely, lovely Sunday, and I will catch you guys soon. Bye.